Buy low, sell high. What is up, nerds? My name is Cory Bergeron, and you are watching my Emmy award-winning show, Cory Bergeron Recordings. Today we're going to talk about using reference tracks or reference mixes. A common practice in the mixing process is using commercially released tracks as references to give you perspective on any and all aspects of your mix. Are your vocals too loud? Does your bass have enough low end? Are your guitars bright enough? Does your mix have the impact you want? Oftentimes, mixers will find themselves in a position where they've spent too much time working on one specific element of a mix, or they've just spent too much time on a mix, and the easiest way to regain perspective is to listen to other music. Specifically, music that you're familiar with and music that you know translates across other playback systems. Referencing other commercially released music is a valuable and sometimes life-saving tool, but sometimes it can be detrimental and it can cause you to overthink or overanalyze something that may not need to be. So here are my 5 tips on how to appropriately use reference tracks when mixing. Number 1, before I start a mixing session or before I sit down to, mix music for a prolonged period of time, I like to kind of clean up my workstation just to kind of get myself in the headspace. And while I'm doing this, I listen to music through my monitoring system at the volume that I will be mixing to familiarize myself with the environment. It is important to know how music sounds coming through your monitoring system in your room with your speakers. So I make sure to do that before, just to acclimatize myself to my room. Number 2, understand what you like about the music that you are referencing. This one may take a little bit of experience, but as long as you're aware, it's an easy concept to grasp. So I can probably explain this best by using an example. So one reference, or I guess 2 reference tracks that I use very often would be Jimmy Eat World's songs Bleed American and Sweetness. They're both off the same album, Bleed American, that came out in 2001. And there are particular elements that I like about these tracks that I like to reference when I'm mixing. So I guess some examples would be, I like the way the drums sound, and I like the impact they have. And I also like that they aren't like the lead instrument. They sit really well in the mix, they're impactful, but they're not in the way of anything else. I like the way the kick drum and the bass guitar sit together. They interact really, really well. They both have their place in the mix, but they don't overlap, which is great. I think the distorted main rhythm guitars across the album are a little darker than what I normally like, so it's just something to keep in mind. And I also like the way the vocal sits across the album. I think it sits in the mix perfectly. There's a lot of space around it, and it's not sitting above the music. It's like totally locked in there. So when I'm referencing a mix, let's say I'm working on the guitars. If I'm listening to the guitars in my mix, and then I listen to the Jimmy Eat World one, and I find the EQ is about the same, I might want to brighten my guitars up a little bit. If I'm listening to my mix, and then I listen to the Jimmy Eat World one, and I notice that the drums are significantly quieter in the Jimmy Eat World one, well, maybe I should just turn down my drums just a touch. I am aware of what I like about the mix and what I might do differently in my productions, and I think that's really, really important to know what you like about what you're referencing and what you would probably do differently. I think that's important, so that's step number 2. Understand what it is that you like about the mix that you're referencing. Number 3, I should also add that these aren't in any real particular order. But yeah, number 3, be conscious of the tuning and key of the song that you are referencing. In the past, when I'm trying to get the low end of my mix correct, I've referenced other songs that I think have a great low end to them, and I've noticed that the other songs may sound deeper or fuller, or I don't know, other words that you could use to describe a pleasant sounding low end. And it took me some time to realize that some of these songs are tuned lower and are in a different key that allows the instrument to physically play lower notes. So I may not be able to yield the same results strictly due to the arrangement and what has been performed. So you have to be aware of what exactly it is that you are listening to, so you don't end up overthinking or overanalyzing and trying to create something that naturally just shouldn't and won't be there. Number 4, this is a big one for me. This is one that often gets me, and that is be aware of the production style of the track that you're referencing. Let me tell you a common occurrence. Oftentimes I'll get 80% through a mix, feeling confident, everything sounding the way that I think it should, and then I will reference a song that I probably shouldn't reference, or it's not one specific song, but I'm just referencing a song that has a production style that is way different to the one that I'm mixing, and then I start overthinking and second guessing things. So an example of this would be if I'm working on a calculated, polished, alternative rock production. So that means the vocals are tuned, the drums are quantized, the drums have samples, everything's locked in timing wise. And then I listen to some raw, noisy, energy filled, live off the floor production that just has this embrace of imperfection that is really musical. Once I start listening back to my mix, I start overthinking, holy crap, are my samples too loud? Did I quantize the drums to the point of killing the feel? Are the vocals tuned too much? Do the guitars sound like they were overdubbed in the studio and it doesn't actually sound like a band playing music like this other thing that I'm listening to? And then I start destroying my mix. I start going backwards, and then it takes, a full day to come back to and be like, why did I do that? Why did I take the time to to go backwards? It is important to be aware of the production style. On the contrary, if you're trying to record a band that is, a noisy, live off the floor style production, and you are embracing the imperfection, if you're listening to like a super polished metal song or something like that, you're gonna start thinking like, holy crap, nothing sounds the way that it should. So be aware of what you are referencing, and reference mixes that are appropriate and applicable to what you're working on at the time, to avoid overthinking, overanalyzing things that don't, that don't matter. And number 5, this is another one that I don't see often commented on across the net, and that is the track that you are referencing is probably mastered. If you are referencing a commercially released song, it's probably mastered. So if you are mixing and you are not mixing into a mastering chain, that means that the track that you are referencing has tons of limiting and compression and all that good stuff that happens in the mastering stage, and your track doesn't. I'll be the first one to tell you that limiting has a distinct sound to it, and I think it's a sound that we associate with a final product kind of thing. Just a little bit of limiting on the final track makes it sound like a record, I guess, and in some ways. You can find me on it in the comment section. Go for it. So I know for me, in the early days when I was referencing commercial mixes, I would overcompensate and start overcompressing and maybe limiting individual elements within my mix to try and make my mix sound like a mastered track. And ultimately, once it got to the mastering stage, everything was super squashed. There's no dynamics, and everything was just cooked. Everything was cooked, and that's not what we want. So be aware that the track that you're referencing is probably a mastered track. Again, if you're not mixing into a mastering chain, I would recommend that you throw maybe a little bit more compression and some limiting on your master bus when you're referencing, just to kind of check it out and see how it compares and see what your track will sound like once it is mastered. I think there's tons of value in that. Okay, so those are the 5 things. Again, no particular order, but I will name them off again. Number one, listen to reference music before you start mixing or before you start a long mixing session, just to acclimate your ears to your mixing environment and to get used to listening to music through your speakers. Number 2, understand what you like about the music that you're referencing so you can strategically implement what it is you like about those mixes to yours and compare those elements, and then disregard the things that you may not want. Number 3, be conscious of the tuning and key of the song. If the song's in a specific tuning and maybe even in a specific key, it can affect what notes are obviously being played, and again, it can just simply lead to overanalyzing or overthinking something that just doesn't need to be. Number 4, be aware of the production style of the track that you're referencing. This one is huge. I make this mistake far too often. But again, if you are recording something that is supposed to have this production style and you reference something that is the complete opposite, it will only lead to you overthinking and overanalyzing things that don't need to be. I've said that a couple times, but... And lastly, number 5, the mix that you are referencing is probably mastered. So be aware that there is limiting on it. Limiting has a sound to it, and it is a part of the music that we listen to today. So be sure to not overcompensate and start squashing elements in your mix that may not need to be, and potentially try doing a mock master to see how it compares versus the mastered commercial reference track that you are using. So hopefully those 5 tips help you get closer to finishing a mix, creating better mixes, and avoid going down the rabbit hole on things that do not matter. If you have a functional heart, please consider dropping a like on the video. Oh, my voice cracked. Please consider dropping a like on the video. If you've had a positive or negative life experience in the last let's say quarter century, please consider detailing it in the comment section below. If you haven't already subscribed, please do that now. I can't guarantee that it'll make your mixes or productions any better, but I can guarantee that it won't make them any worse. If you are interested in joining a Facebook group with like-minded individuals such as yourself and myself, you can do so by clicking the link in the description. Start a conversation. You might learn something, I might learn something, everyone else might learn something. Only good things can happen. This is the end of the video. I hope you learned something. I hope you have enjoyed hearing me talk, and I'll see you in the next video. God bless.